It was raining, the kind of heavy downpour that leaves everything soaked in minutes, the clouds hanging low like they were holding their breath. I stood outside the church, my hands gripping my military dress uniform tightly as I tried to keep it dry. My eyes stayed focused on the building in front of me, where my family was gathered. My name is Lieutenant General Jennifer Maddox. I'm 43 years old and I live in Washington, D.C. I've served in the military for most of my life, working my way up the ranks, earning every stripe through blood, sweat, and years of sacrifice. I always thought my family would be proud of me. I was wrong. The church door opened for a brief moment, and I could hear their laughter echoing out through the rain. My mother's voice rang clear, sharp as glass, followed by my father's deep, drawn-out chuckle. And then, of course, my sister Karen, chiming in with that familiar, high-pitched laugh, the same one she always used when she thought she was the star of the show. But none of them were here for me. Not today. I hadn't been invited to my grandfather's funeral. He had died 2 days ago, and the family had made it clear. They didn't want me there. Apparently, my military career, my accomplishments, hadn't earned me a place at his service, not when my family was gathered to mourn, to have their quiet, peaceful ceremony. "She's probably too busy with her army friends," I'd heard my mother say when she called to tell me the news. "It's not the right place for you, Jen." I was used to this, the coldness, the exclusion, the sneers behind closed doors. It's been a constant in my life. My career, my honors. They didn't matter to them, they never had. I stood there in the rain, staring at the doors to the church as if they would open any minute to let me in, to let me be a part of it all. But no, nothing. Silence, the cold, sharp sting of rejection. "Look at her out there. Isn't she pathetic?" That was Karen's voice from inside the church. The words made my chest tighten. I didn't need to hear them, but I couldn't help it. They were so clear, so cruel. I don't know why she thought she'd be welcome here dressed like that. I didn't even have time to process it before my mother's voice joined in. "She's a disgrace. She brings shame on our family, on his memory. Always with the military, always with the honor. She's never been one of us. Not really." A flash of anger rose in me, but I swallowed it down. The rain poured harder, and I stood a little straighter, trying to pull myself together. It didn't matter. Nothing they said mattered anymore. I was still trying to breathe through the growing knot in my stomach when the sound of marching footsteps reached my ears. The rain kept coming down in torrents. But there they were, my Marines. 12 of them, lined up and walking with perfect precision toward me, led by a 4-star general no less. I turned to face them as they approached, and my heart swelled with pride. They were here for me. They were here because they respected me, because they had always respected my service. As they reached me, the general in front, his uniform crisp and immaculate despite the downpour, came to a halt and saluted me. "Lieutenant General Maddox," he said, his voice strong, respectful, like the world hadn't just turned on its head. "Your service is an honor to us all, ma'am." They all saluted me in turn, one after another. My chest tightened again, but this time it wasn't with anger. It was with something different, something heavier, something I hadn't expected. Pride, recognition, honor. All the things my family had denied me. The sound of boots hitting the wet pavement echoed around me, loud and clear. The others inside the church couldn't see it, couldn't hear it. But I did. I felt it. I stood tall, returned their salutes with the same pride and respect they had shown me. And then, without saying a word, I turned my back on the church. Without a glance, I walked toward the waiting procession of Marines. They didn't mock me. They didn't turn their backs on me. The rain kept falling, but for the first time, it didn't feel like it mattered. I had my dignity, and I knew in that moment who truly recognized me. The doors of the church stayed closed behind me, and that was fine, because I had something better now: respect. I've spent most of my life feeling like a shadow in my own family. Growing up, I was always there, always doing my best, but never seen for who I was or what I achieved. It wasn't until years later, when I was standing at the gates of the military, that I finally understood why. When I was a kid, it was always Karen, my younger sister, who got the attention. She was the pretty one, the popular one. She had those long blonde curls that looked perfect even after a storm, and she knew how to make people laugh in that effortless way, even when she wasn't trying. I'd spent so many years trying to get my parents to look at me, to see what I was capable of, but it was like talking to a brick wall. I was never the one they were proud of, even when I should have been. It started small. When I brought home a report card with straight A's, My mom barely glanced at it. Good job, Jen, she'd say, distracted by something on TV. But you know your sister is really excelling in her extracurriculars. It wasn't that Karen was a bad kid, or that she didn't deserve praise. She did. But I'd always felt like I was invisible in comparison. When I joined the track team in middle school and became the fastest runner in my class, I thought maybe this would be my moment. Maybe they'd finally notice me. But when I told my parents, my mom didn't even look up from her magazine. Good for you, Jen. But Karen's got that art show coming up. You know how important that is? I learned quickly not to expect much from them. My achievements, big or small, never seemed to matter. But Karen's? Everything she did was celebrated like she was some kind of princess. It wasn't even about the attention. It was about the quiet way they'd make me feel like I didn't belong. Like I was some afterthought that couldn't possibly compare to the shining star of the family. It all came to a head one evening when I was 17, just a few months before I turned 18. My parents had invited the family over for dinner. It was supposed to be a nice night, a chance for all of us to catch up. But all I could think about was the big track meet coming up that weekend. I was nervous, but I'd trained hard and I was hoping I could win a ribbon. Dinner started, and my mom was rattling off about some fundraiser Karen had been asked to organize for school, which had a lot of buzz around it. Everyone was impressed. Everyone was proud. Jen, why don't you tell everyone what you've been working on? My dad's voice broke into my thoughts. I looked up, surprised. I hadn't really done anything new. The meet was coming up, but I didn't think they'd care. I shrugged. I'm running the 400 meters this weekend, hoping to win. There was a slight pause, like everyone had to process that. And then Karen chimed in, laughing loudly. Oh my God, Jen, the 400? I thought you were going to do something important like the mile or the 800. 400's a bit basic, don't you think? My mom shot Karen a quick glance and smiled at her. Well, you know, dear, not everyone can run long distances, but good for Jen for trying her best. The words stung, but I didn't let them show. I had been used to it by now, the way they'd brush me off, the way they'd pretend to care, the way Karen always got more attention for doing less. The whole dinner went like that. Karen got her praises, I got the scraps. Every time I tried to talk about something I cared about, something I had accomplished, my family found a way to turn the conversation back to her. My stomach churned. I had felt invisible before, but that night, I felt like I didn't even exist. As the evening wore on, I became more and more quiet, watching them all, laughing and eating, pretending that I was one of them. But I knew the truth. I wasn't. And I never would be. It wasn't until dessert that the final straw broke. My dad, with his usual smile that never quite reached his eyes, passed around a birthday card for Karen. We all need to sign this for Karen's big art show coming up, he said, completely oblivious to how uncomfortable I felt. You know how much it means to her? I had been holding a spoonful of cake when he said that. I put it down slowly, my hands shaking as I realized, once again, that nothing I did, nothing I would ever do could change the fact that Karen was the golden child, the one who mattered. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor as I did. I'm going to bed, I muttered, not looking anyone in the eye. I heard Karen snicker under her breath, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to stay there anymore, trying to be someone they didn't want to see. That night, I made a decision. The second I turned 18, I was leaving. I didn't know where I was going, but it would be far away from them. I would leave everything behind because if they didn't see me for who I was, maybe the world would. And then maybe, just maybe, I would finally matter. The day I left home was the day I stopped caring whether my family ever saw me or not. I was 18 years old, and I had made the decision. I wasn't going to sit around hoping they'd change their minds about me. I was going to do something for myself. I had no idea where I was going or what I was going to do, but the Marines seemed like the only place where I might be respected, where I could prove I was more than the quiet girl who always had to fight for attention. My parents were too absorbed in their own lives to notice, but I didn't need their approval anymore. I packed a duffel bag, said goodbye to my empty room, and left. Boot camp was brutal. It wasn't like I hadn't expected it, but nothing could have fully prepared me for the physical and mental toll it would take. The screaming drill instructors, the constant pressure to push past my limits, the exhausting runs and sleepless nights. It was more than I had ever dealt with. But it was also the first time in my life I felt like I belonged. There was no judgment there. There was no one looking at me like I didn't fit in. Every challenge I faced wasn't about what I had or hadn't done before. It was about who I was in that moment and what I was willing to do next. I rose through the ranks quickly, earning every promotion, every honor, and each recognition of service. It wasn't easy, but I did it. Each day, I worked harder than the last, building up not just my strength, but my resolve. But even as I found my place, my family remained as distant as ever. I would send postcards from each new base, small notes letting them know I was okay, keeping them updated on my accomplishments, the promotions, the awards. But there was no response. Not one letter, not one call, not even a message on social media. I didn't expect much, but I couldn't help but feel the sting each time. I had hoped they might show up for me just once, but their silence spoke volumes. When I earned my first promotion to sergeant, I was bursting with pride. I sent them a photo, the ceremonial one they take when you pin on your new stripes. It was a huge deal to me, and I thought, maybe this time they'd see me, really see me. But again, nothing. Not even a word. It didn't take long for me to stop hoping for their approval. I stopped trying to make them proud because I realized that was a battle I was never going to win. Their version of success wasn't mine. I wasn't going to fit their mold, and no matter how hard I worked, they would never truly see me for who I was. The Marines became my family. Every challenge, every hardship, every success, it was mine. It was all about me, not who they wanted me to be or what they thought I should accomplish. It was the first time in my life I stopped waiting for their recognition. I learned to validate myself. As I climbed the ranks, I found pride in my uniform, in my work, and in the team I was a part of. I didn't need their approval anymore. In fact, I had stopped caring whether they ever gave it to me. I had found my own path, and the Marines showed me the respect I had always craved. But even as I continued to build my career, I couldn't help but feel that empty space when I achieved something big. It was the same hollow feeling I had back home, the one that told me no matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I achieved, it was never going to be enough for them. But at least in the military, I had a place where it was enough. I kept my head down, focused on my work, and built a career. I didn't need their love. I didn't need their approval. I had learned how to stand tall on my own. But every now and then, a small piece of me couldn't help but wonder if they'd ever look up and see me, if they'd ever understand what I had sacrificed. But deep down, I knew the answer. They never would. And for the first time, I was okay with it. I had just returned from a 6-month deployment when I first noticed something was off. I wasn't used to checking my bank accounts while I was overseas, but after finally getting settled back into my routine, I decided it was time to make sure everything was in order. I had a habit of tracking my finances, always keeping things organized and tight. The military had drilled that into me, and I appreciated the stability it provided. But this time was different. I logged in, expecting to see my usual balance, only to be met with a sinking feeling in my stomach. There was a large, unaccounted for withdrawal that I didn't recognize. It was so massive that it seemed impossible, the kind of transaction that couldn't simply be a mistake. I shook my head, thinking it was some kind of glitch, so I checked the details. The transfer led to a long string of charges from various accounts I didn't recognize. My mind raced. This wasn't just one wrong transaction. This was systematic. I called my bank immediately. The customer service rep was polite, but after she asked a few questions, I knew something had gone terribly wrong. She confirmed what I feared. The charges came from an account under my name. And worse, the bank flagged a series of transfers back to an address, my childhood home. I sat down hard on my couch, my pulse pounding in my ears. No, I whispered to myself. It couldn't be. It had to be a mistake. But the details didn't lie. I made another call, this one to the fraud department. They confirmed it. Almost $500,000 had been siphoned from my account over the course of several years. It wasn't a single unauthorized transaction. It was a series of them, all pointing back to my family. My stomach turned over as I connected the dots. My family, my own blood, had stolen from me. They had been managing my finances for years, helping me while I was deployed. They were the ones I trusted. I had given them access, assuming it was a temporary measure while I was away. I had no reason to believe anything was wrong, but now I was seeing the betrayal for what it was. I stared at the numbers on the screen, feeling the walls of the room close in on me. This wasn't just about money. It was about the years of trust I had put in them. I had always been the dutiful daughter, the one who worked hard, did her duty, and sent money when they asked. I never questioned their intentions. But now I realize that's exactly what they had been doing, using me, for years. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just sat there, staring at the screen, the realization sinking in like a weight I couldn't push off. The fraud department promised to open an investigation, but I didn't need them to tell me what had happened. I knew who had done it. And more than that, I knew the depth of their betrayal. I thought back to everything. The quiet moments when I sent postcards from every new base, the letters, the birthday cards, all the small gestures I had hoped would bridge the distance. But they were silent, each failure to respond another brick in the wall between us. And now, this. I had always wondered if I had been overthinking things, if maybe I was too sensitive, too distant, but now I knew the truth. They never saw me for who I was. To them, I was just a source of money, a tool, someone they could use without a second thought. I spent the next hour on the phone with the fraud department, securing all my accounts and making sure the situation wouldn't get worse. The agent on the other end was sympathetic, but I barely registered her words. I could hear the pounding of my heartbeat in my ears as I tried to piece everything together. When I finally hung up, I knew what I had to do. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the principle, the depth of their manipulation. And now that I knew what they had done, I wasn't going to let it slide. I would get back what was mine, and I would make sure they never took advantage of me again. But first, I had to confront them. I had to go back to the place where it all started, to the people who had used me for so long, and show them what they had done. I spent the rest of the evening drafting an email to my attorney. It was time to start planning, to fight for what was rightfully mine. There was no going back. They had crossed the line. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but at that moment, I understood something. I had spent years seeking approval, respect, and love from people who didn't see me for who I was. Now I was going to fight for myself, not because I expected anything from them, but because I knew I deserved better. And I wasn't going to stop until I got it. It was 3 days after I had learned the truth about my family's betrayal. 3 days of processing, stewing in my anger, and piecing together the pieces of my broken trust. I wasn't sure how to feel, angry, sad, numb, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I had the proof. I had gathered everything I needed. Bank statements, transfer logs, even a trail of emails where they'd subtly asked for more money, disguised as help or emergencies. I'd saved it all, knowing one day I'd need it. Today was that day. I called my family to tell them I was coming over. I didn't ask. I didn't care if they wanted to see me or not. I was going to confront them, armed with evidence that would destroy their lies. This wasn't about talking. This was about showing them the truth they had tried so desperately to hide from me. When I arrived at my parents' house, the place I'd grown up, everything felt wrong. The front door, usually open and welcoming, was locked. It felt like a barrier between us, a reminder of how far we had drifted, how much had been stolen from me, not just money, but time, trust, and respect. I rang the doorbell, and it took what felt like forever before my mother opened the door. Her smile was tight, forced. "Jen," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I wasn't expecting you." "Of course you weren't," I replied coldly, stepping past her into the hallway. My father was in the living room, watching TV, pretending he didn't hear us. I could feel his avoidance like a weight hanging in the air. "Where's Karen?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "She's busy," my mother said quickly, not looking me in the eye. "What's this all about, Jen?" I didn't say anything, just pulled out the folder from my bag and placed it on the coffee table. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting to the folder and then back to the TV. But I wasn't letting this go, not this time. I opened the folder and the silence in the room became thick. One by one, I laid out the documents. Bank transfers, account statements, emails, each one a slap in the face. Each one a proof of what they had done to me. "You've been taking from me," I said, my voice steady but cold. "For years, over $500,000, and you thought I wouldn't find out." My mother's face went pale, her lips pressing together in a thin line. My father's hand trembled as he reached for his drink, but he didn't speak. Karen wasn't here, but I didn't need her to be. The truth was laid out for them both to see. "Jen, we didn't think it would be a big deal," my father said, his voice shaking. "It wasn't like we were trying to hurt you." "Really?" I said, my voice rising slightly. "You thought I wouldn't notice the money missing? You thought I wouldn't wonder why I was never getting a response from you when I sent letters, postcards, updates on my career? Why I had to chase after you for years, begging for some recognition when all along you were draining me dry? I turned to my mother, who had been silent, her eyes glistening with tears, but I didn't feel sorry for her. You called me a disgrace, a failure. You told me I brought shame to this family. And all this time you've been lying to me, stealing from me, and you don't even have the decency to apologize. I, Jen, I'm sorry, my mother whispered, but the apology didn't feel real. She never really looked at me, not like I needed her to. She was still lost in her own world, only seeing me as something to be used, not as a daughter, not as a person. My father finally spoke up, his voice more forceful now. We were trying to make things easier for you, Jen. You were always working so hard, always so busy. We didn't want you to worry about the finances. But you didn't ask me, did you? I shot back. You just took. You didn't care what I thought, whether I was okay with it. You didn't even trust me enough to handle my own money. You saw me as a cash machine. I wasn't your daughter to you. I was just a tool. The words were bitter and the pain stung as I said them. But they were the truth. The truth that had been festering inside me for so long, and I had finally found the strength to speak it aloud. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I never meant for it to go this far, Jen. Too late for apologies now, I snapped. I'm done. I'm done with all of it. I stood up and grabbed the folder. I'm going to get a lawyer. I'm going to make sure you pay back every cent. You thought you could take advantage of me forever, but I'm done being your punching bag. I didn't even look back as I walked toward the door. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I didn't care anymore. I had done what I needed to do. As I reached for the door handle, my mother's voice stopped me. Jen, please. We're your family. I turned to face her, the weight of everything crashing down on me, but I held my ground. No, you're not. Not anymore. And with that, I walked out of the house, leaving them behind. For good this time. The next few days felt like a blur. I avoided my phone, ignored my emails, and tried to focus on anything but the weight of the situation. The confrontation with my family had left me emotionally drained, but there was something else simmering underneath. I wasn't done. I knew that. I couldn't just walk away from this fight until I had reclaimed what was rightfully mine. As the shock of what had happened began to fade into something more methodical, I decided to take the next step, the legal route. I started with an attorney, a trusted one from the military community, who had helped me with various matters over the years. I needed someone who wouldn't just offer generic advice, but who would fight for me as if my case mattered to them. I was going to expose them. I wasn't just fighting for the money, I was fighting for the respect I'd never received from them. And now I had a new purpose, to reclaim my dignity and bring everything they'd stolen out into the light. But before I could move forward with any of that, there was one thing I needed to do first. One thing I hadn't expected. It was a Saturday morning when I sat down at my grandfather's old desk, the desk where I had spent hours as a child, playing with his old papers, listening to his stories. I had avoided it since his funeral, avoiding the lingering memories of his soft smile, his gentle eyes. But now, I had no choice. I had been told that my grandfather had left me something. Not much, just a few things tucked away in an envelope, but enough to make me curious. He'd always been the quiet one in the family, the one who stood in the background, but I knew he had always believed in me, more than anyone else ever had. I dug through the drawers, old papers, and forgotten mementos mixed together in a chaotic jumble. But as I sifted through the clutter, I found a yellowed envelope, its edges frayed. On the front was my name in his neat handwriting, and beneath it a single word. For you. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't expected this. It was like he had known I'd need something, a way to prove that someone had always seen me for who I was. I carefully opened the envelope, my hands shaking slightly. Inside, I found a will. Not just any will. It was his will, a legal document that had been hidden in plain sight all along. It wasn't just the usual bits and pieces of family inheritance. There was something else, something that made my breath catch in my throat. My grandfather had left me everything. The estate, the old house, the cabin by the lake where he and I used to spend summers. But it wasn't just that. He had left me his financial records too, a detailed list of investments and properties I had never known about. It was all there, the hidden wealth that my family never spoke of. His quiet wealth built over decades of hard work. But what really hit me, the real treasure, was the note tucked at the bottom of the will. It read, Jennifer, you have always been the one who stood tall, no matter the circumstances. I know this isn't much, but it's what I can give you now. Take it and use it for what you believe is right. Don't let them use you the way they've used me. With love, Grandpa tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I wiped them away quickly. I wasn't going to cry. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. But the weight of his words settled in my chest like a stone. He had seen me. He had always seen me, even when no one else did. The feeling of betrayal by my family, the theft, the manipulation, it all made sense now. My grandfather had tried to protect me in his own way, quietly, without fanfare. He had known that one day I would need this, and he had left it for me, knowing the truth. I sat back in the chair, staring at the will. This wasn't just a financial document, it was a declaration. My grandfather had believed in me, even when no one else did. And now, I had everything I needed to fight back, not just for the money, but for the dignity that had been stolen from me. I wasn't alone. I never had been. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace, a sense of purpose. It was time to get serious, time to take control of my life, of my future. With the will in hand, I knew what I had to do next. I was going to use my grandfather's legacy to make sure my family couldn't continue to manipulate me. They would pay for what they'd done, and I was going to make sure the truth came to light. But most importantly, I was going to reclaim my life. The next day, I wasted no time. I contacted the attorney I trusted, someone who had always been reliable, someone who understood the weight of this kind of fight. I needed to make sure that everything I had, every document, every scrap of evidence, was going to be used in the best way possible. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about justice. This was about reclaiming everything they had stolen from me, not just financially, but emotionally. My attorney, Laura, was a no-nonsense kind of person. She had the sharpest mind and an unshakable focus. When I explained the situation over the phone, she didn't hesitate. "You've got a strong case here, Jennifer," she said, her voice calm and professional. "I can help you take them to court if you're ready for this. It's going to be a process, but we can definitely do this." I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the legal papers scattered before me. Documents from my grandfather's will, the list of financial transactions, all of it carefully organized. It felt surreal. Part of me expected the world to collapse under the weight of everything I was about to unleash, but I couldn't stop now. I wasn't going to be the person they had always seen me as, the invisible daughter, the one who never mattered. I was going to take charge of my own narrative. Laura outlined a strategy, using the financial records to show the pattern of manipulation. We would start with the theft, laying out every transaction they had made under my name, and then we would expose the broader story, the years of emotional and financial exploitation. The fraud would be the center of our case, but I wanted more. I wanted the truth laid bare. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. My family was powerful in their own way. They were manipulative, and they knew how to spin things to their advantage. But they had underestimated me. They had underestimated my resolve. I spent the next few days gathering witnesses. Laura had suggested it, people who could attest to my character, my integrity. It wasn't just about showing what they had taken from me. It was about proving who I was, proving that I had worked hard for every single thing I had ever achieved. I wasn't just some naive girl they could use. I reached out to colleagues, fellow officers who had worked with me over the years, people who had seen me push through everything with strength and determination. I wasn't asking for sympathy. I wasn't asking for pity. I was asking for the truth to be heard. One person I reached out to was General Marshall. He had been there when I received my promotion to Lieutenant General, one of the few people who had always respected my service, never questioning me or my commitment. When I called him, he didn't hesitate. "Jennifer," he said, his voice gravelly but warm, "I've seen you at your best. I'll support you in this, however I can." His support gave me a renewed sense of strength. He wasn't the only one. Many of the Marines I had served with, officers, sergeants, people I had led and who had led me, offered to stand by me. They would testify to my character, to the way I had always put the mission first. This wasn't just a fight for money anymore. This was about who I was as a person, and I had earned everything I had through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. Laura worked tirelessly on the legal strategy, organizing everything we needed for the upcoming battle. But as we prepared for the court case, the calls from my family didn't stop. They came in waves, at first with anger, then with desperation. It was my mother who reached out first. I received the call early one morning. Her voice, shaky and uncertain, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Jennifer, she began, her voice cracking, I know you're angry, and I know you've been hurt, but this isn't the way to handle things. We're family. You're going to destroy us. I didn't respond immediately. Part of me wanted to tear into her, to tell her how much damage she had done, how many years I had spent feeling invisible. But I stayed silent, letting her words hang in the air. Jennifer, please, she continued, almost pleading. We didn't mean for any of this to happen. I just want us to move forward as a family. Please don't do this. Please don't go to court. My fingers tightened around the phone. It wasn't the first time I'd heard her beg me for forgiveness, but this time, I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let her words sway me. She had always seen me as something to use, to control, and I wasn't going to let her keep doing it. I took a deep breath, my voice cold and controlled. It's too late for that, Mom. You and Dad have crossed a line, and now I'm going to make sure the world knows the truth. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this for me. I'm done being your backup plan. There was a long pause on the other end. When she finally spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. I never wanted to hurt you. You did, I replied, the words final, and I hung up. I didn't hear from her again for a while, but the messages from my father and Karen flooded in. Karen's messages were a mixture of insults and manipulation. You're ruining everything. You're making us all look bad. You don't want to be the one responsible for the destruction of this family. I ignored them all. Each message, each plea for forgiveness only reinforced my resolve. My family had never seen me, had never valued me, and now I had the chance to make sure they understood who I was. I wasn't the person they could walk all over anymore. The legal battle was just beginning, and I was ready. I wasn't doing it for revenge. I wasn't doing it for anything other than the fact that I deserved better. I had worked too hard for too long to let them take everything from me. I had earned my place, and I was going to make sure they knew it. The next few weeks passed in a blur as we built our case, preparing for the confrontation that was coming. And when it was finally time to face them, I was ready. I wasn't going to back down. Not anymore. The courtroom was sterile, cold, and unwelcoming, but it was where I needed to be. My family, sitting on the opposite side, looked out of place, like they didn't belong here. Yet here they were, attempting to salvage what they could after everything had been exposed. It wasn't just the stolen money, it was the years of manipulation, the emotional abuse, the disregard for who I was, all of it laid bare before the judge, the lawyers, and the few witnesses who had come forward to support me. I didn't need anyone to tell me what I already knew. I had earned every bit of respect I had, and I wasn't going to let them twist the narrative anymore. They thought they could control me, that I was nothing without their approval. But sitting here in this moment, I knew I was finally in control. Laura, my attorney, sat beside me, going over the documents one last time before the hearing began. Her presence was steadying, her calm demeanor a sharp contrast to the storm swirling inside me. We had already laid the groundwork, bank statements, emails, contracts, but this was the final push. I had to finish it. I had to walk away knowing I had reclaimed everything they had taken. Are you ready? She asked, her voice low but full of confidence. I nodded. Let's end this. The courtroom doors opened and the judge entered, calling everyone to attention. I straightened in my seat, my mind clearing as the formalities began. The room was full of strangers, most of them just doing their job. But my eyes were on my family, sitting there across from me, looking like they were trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. My mother's eyes flicked nervously between the judge and me, but she didn't meet my gaze directly. My father looked as though he would rather be anywhere else, and Karen, sitting beside them, shot me a look of pure resentment, as if I had betrayed them for simply asking for what was mine. It didn't matter. They didn't matter anymore. The hearing began, and the lawyer for my family spoke first, trying to paint a picture of misunderstanding, of miscommunication. He used all the right legal jargon, trying to soften the truth. It didn't take long for the judge to stop him. His arguments were weak, and he knew it. He was grasping at straws, hoping that somehow he could sway the court with their manufactured stories. Then it was my turn. Laura stood up and motioned for me to follow. My heart thudded in my chest, but I didn't hesitate. I had been fighting for this moment for far too long. Lieutenant General Maddox, the judge said, acknowledging me with a nod. Please, proceed. I stood tall, feeling the weight of the uniform, of everything I had earned in my career. It wasn't just for me anymore. It was for everyone who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, or manipulated. It was for every sacrifice I had made, for the respect I had fought for my entire life. I looked directly at my family as I began to speak. Their eyes were wide, their faces pale as I laid out the truth. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady, I stand before you today not just as a victim of financial theft, but as someone who has been systematically dismissed and disrespected by the people who should have supported me the most. My family. I paused, letting the words sink in, watching my parents shift uncomfortably. My father's eyes darted to the floor, his hands clenched at his sides. My mother's lips were tight, as if she were trying to swallow the truth. I trusted my family to manage my finances while I was deployed, I continued, but instead, they took advantage of my absence and drained my accounts, stealing $500,000 over the course of several years. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a calculated betrayal. The room was silent. I could hear the rustling of papers, the slight shuffle of feet, but my focus was solely on my family. They couldn't escape this, not anymore. I gave them everything I had, I went on, my voice gaining strength. I gave them my trust, my money, my time, and in return, they used me. They used me for everything I was worth and then discarded me the moment they no longer needed me. This case is not just about the stolen money. It's about the years I spent hoping they would see me for who I am, only to realize that I was never good enough for them. I wasn't their daughter, I was their ATM. I turned my gaze back to the judge. I'm not here to seek vengeance, Your Honor. I'm here to reclaim what is mine. Not just the money, but my dignity, the respect that was stolen from me. I've spent too long living in the shadow of my family's expectations, and I refuse to do that any longer. There was a long silence. I could feel the weight of the room, the tension thick in the air. My family sat in stunned silence, unable to argue with the truth. My mother looked as though she might break, her hands shaking in her lap, but she said nothing. My father's face was unreadable, his eyes focused on the table in front of him. Karen, however, glared at me with open disdain, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, but even she couldn't deny the facts. The judge finally spoke, his voice firm but compassionate. Lieutenant General Maddox, I've reviewed the evidence presented and I have no doubt about the validity of your claims. Your family's actions were, as you've stated, a breach of trust, and I will ensure that they are held accountable for what they have done. I let out a slow breath, my shoulders relaxing for the first time in years. It wasn't over yet, but this was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when I knew, without a doubt, that I was no longer powerless. The judge continued, outlining the next steps of the case, but my focus drifted. I was already thinking about what came next, the aftermath, the fallout. My family might never understand what they had done, but they would feel the consequences. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care if they did. I had finally taken control of my own destiny. It had been months since the legal victory. My family's attempts to manipulate me had failed, and they had, for the most part, fallen silent. The money was returned, the court orders were in place, and the truth had been exposed. But despite the victory, there was still something missing. The emptiness didn't just go away. There was no sudden rush of joy or fulfillment. What I had reclaimed was justice, not peace. But life had a way of moving forward, and slowly, piece by piece, I began to rebuild what had been broken. It wasn't easy. I spent long nights reflecting on everything, what my family had done, what I had been through, and how far I had come. The victory didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a relief. A weight that had been crushing me for so long had finally been lifted, but it left a void behind, a quiet emptiness where something had once been. One of the first things I did was start giving back. It wasn't about charity, not in the way people usually think. It was about purpose, about finding meaning in the pieces of my life that had been fractured and forgotten. I used part of the inheritance from my grandfather to start a program for homeless veterans. Veterans who had been ignored, who had been cast aside, just like I had felt my whole life. I called it the Quiet Table, a small but consistent breakfast service for those who had nowhere else to go. It was humble, but it was mine. It was a place where veterans, like me, could find solace in each other's company. A place where there were no judgments, no expectations, just people who understood the weight of service, of sacrifice, and of feeling forgotten. It wasn't a glamorous project. There were no headlines, no cameras following me around, no recognition. But it was exactly what I needed. It felt right, like I had finally found the kind of family I had always been looking for. A family that didn't look at you with expectation, that didn't care about appearances, that just accepted you for who you were. The first morning I opened the quiet table, I wasn't sure what to expect. I had sent out flyers, made calls, and posted on veteran forums. I didn't think it would be much, just a few people trickling in. But to my surprise, when I opened the doors, there was a line of men and women, all sitting down to coffee and pancakes, some with military jackets still on, others wrapped in the cold remnants of a life on the streets. They didn't ask who I was or why I was doing this. They didn't care about my rank, my uniform, or my past. They were there for the same reason I was, to find a space to breathe, to eat, to not feel alone in a world that had pushed them aside. As the weeks went by, the quiet table grew. It wasn't a big operation, but it had a real, tangible effect. I started learning the names of the regulars, hearing their stories, understanding their struggles. The veterans weren't just grateful for the meal, they were grateful for the community that had formed, the place where they weren't just defined by their service, but by their shared experience. One day, while I was serving coffee to a regular, an older man with a weathered face and a thick Southern accent, he said something that stuck with me for days. "You show up," he said, his voice low but firm. "That's what matters. The rest don't mean a damn thing. You show up, and that's all we need." I didn't say anything at first, but those words sank into me like a weight dropping into a still pond. For the first time in my life, I didn't need to do anything more than just be there, to show up for the people who needed me, the way I had always needed someone to show up for me. As I walked home that night, the city lights flickering above me, I realized that I had built something real. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't the daughter who had been dismissed. I wasn't the woman they had tried to mold into someone I wasn't. I was me, strong, capable, and enough. A few months later, I found myself at a small bar downtown, sitting across from a veteran named George. He was one of the first to show up at the quiet table, and after a few weeks of serving him coffee and pancakes, we started talking. He had a warmth about him that made him approachable, a rough around the edges charm that reminded me of the men I had served with. "You've got something good here," he said one night as we were chatting over drinks. "You know that, right?" I looked around the bar. It wasn't fancy, wasn't even really mine in the way that the quiet table felt like mine. But it was still a place where people came together, where they could be themselves. It was a different kind of family, but a family all the same. "Yeah," I said quietly, my smile small but real. "I think I do." Over time, I found myself building more relationships with the veterans. These weren't perfect people, and neither was I. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged. These men and women didn't care about my background, my past. They didn't care that I had been betrayed by the people who should have supported me the most. All they cared about was whether I showed up, whether I kept showing up. And I did. Every single day. A year passed since I had made the decision to leave my family behind. Since I had taken control of my life, reclaimed my respect, and found my purpose. Things with the quiet table had blossomed, and I could see the impact it was making. Not just for the veterans, but for me too. It wasn't just a breakfast service. It was a place of healing, a place to learn how to be vulnerable, how to be human again. It was the family I had always longed for. One afternoon, while serving coffee to one of the regulars, I got a text message from a number I didn't recognize. It was from my attorney. "Jennifer, I just wanted to update you. Your grandfather's estate is now fully processed. The remaining funds have been deposited into your account. You are officially the sole beneficiary." I stared at the screen for a long moment. The inheritance had been part of a plan, something I had done for financial security, but now it felt like the final step in my journey to reclaim everything I had lost. I thought back to the day I first read my grandfather's will, the day I realized he had always seen me. And for the first time, I felt a true sense of closure. The money didn't matter anymore. The wealth wasn't what I was after. I had already found my legacy, my family. I had shown up, and they had shown up for me. That was enough. As the veterans filtered in that evening, I poured coffee and served pancakes with a newfound peace. I had finally found the family I'd been searching for, and it was made of people who knew the value of showing up.